Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Daily Devotional. So our Daily Devotional today is going to come from Judges chapter 2. There were several articles leading up to Memorial Day, and that referred to a poll. There were several polls, but basically asking, were you taught and do you know what Memorial Day is all about? And there's an increasing number of people every year that they do the poll that it's just another day off for them. They aren't really told what Memorial Day is all about. Some of them think it's about one thing when it's not. Some people confuse it with Veterans Day and things like that. But it seems like every generation, there's less and less people who remember what Memorial Day is all about. And it's kind of interesting because it's reminiscent of what happens in Judges chapter 2. This is as Joshua has died, and in verse 8 and 9, he's buried. And then in verse 10, the scriptures say, when all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. And as we go through here, we're going to notice what this new generation does. It says in verse 11, that the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were all around them, and they bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. The Ashtoreths are the female versions of Baal. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. So he delivered them into the hands of plunderers who despoiled them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for calamity, as the Lord had said and as the Lord had sworn to them. And they were greatly distressed. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but they played the harlot with other gods and bowed down to them. They turned quickly from the way in which their fathers walked, and obeying the commandments of the Lord, they did not do so. When the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. But the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed them and harassed them. And it came to pass when the judge was dead that they reverted and behaved more corruptly than their fathers, by following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not cease from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. Then the Lord of anger was hot against Israel, and he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant which I commanded their fathers, and has not heeded my voice, I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, so that through them I may test Israel, whether they will keep the ways of the Lord to walk in them as their fathers kept them or not. Therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out immediately, nor did he deliver them into the hand of Joshua. Of course, back in chapter 1, Manasseh and Naphtali, I think it was, a couple of the tribes did not destroy all of the foreign peoples that were in the land of Canaan as they were instructed to. And that's going to come back to be a major part, obviously, in the book of Judges. But it's interesting because when I first read this, I thought, well, this is kind of a summary of what the book of Judges is all about. But it almost sounds as if there was an entire group of judges even before the judges that we have, because it sounds as though the writer of Judges is going in chronological order. All this stuff is happening because this generation came along that did not remember Jehovah. They didn't do what Jehovah said. So God would bring up a judge, and they would all, okay, we'll do what God says. And then as soon as that judge died, then they'd go back to doing their ways. Then bad things would happen. God would allow these other nations to distress the children of Israel. The children of Israel would cry out to the Lord. The Lord would have pity on them and send another deliverer, another judge. And then the same cycle would happen all over again. So whether or not Judges chapter 2 is the judges mentioned here are in reference to then the specific judges that come along, chapter 3 through the rest of the book of Judges, or this was an entire cycle that took place shortly after Joshua died, but before we get to Othniel and the rest of them. I don't know. But what I want to focus on, of course, that cycle that is consistent over and over and over again. And God, and it's interesting that God, he has pity on them. You know, he sees that they're being distressed, and we see in verse, where is it? I should have paid attention when I was reading it, because verse 18, for the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed them and harassed them. And every single time, God has pity on his people. You would think eventually Israel would catch on, but they didn't. But this goes back to verse 10. And I think this is an important point to make, not only for, obviously, as it pertains to these articles that I was reading, but the point that is ultimately even more important of that, the spiritual application of it. Another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord nor the work which he had done for Israel. A lot of these articles made a point to encourage people to teach their children about Memorial Day, so that we could kind of stem the tide of each new generation losing a remembrance of what Memorial Day is all about, so that every generation can be taught that they need to remember those who have died in service to our country and in the service of keeping us free and so forth. So that, that's the whole point of Memorial Day, that it's not just a day off of work or a day off of school. Of course, most school is out by now. But it's a day which is to be remembered for a reason. And that we should teach our children that. Instead of just letting it be one of those holidays that people get off of work and people grill or whatever, that it have a meaning as it's supposed to. And I kind of thought about that, and I thought about what we find here in Judges 2 and in verse 10, that there must have been a whole generation of people, obviously not all of them, there was a remnant, but there was this whole generation of people who didn't teach their children, at least as they should have, about who Jehovah was, about what Jehovah had done for Israel, about how Jehovah had led them to this place. In fact, we read that after Joshua dies, the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord which he done for Israel. So up to a certain point, they did fine. But then after Joshua died and after those elders had died, after that generation died out, the next generation that came along, either they weren't taught properly or maybe they just didn't care, but contained within the law of the Lord, back in Deuteronomy, is the commandment for the people to teach their children when you rise up, when you lie down, when you walk by the way, that you remind your children of Jehovah and what the law of Jehovah was. And it's fascinating to me that this is it's a human problem. It is a human problem. And that this is kind of just, the Memorial Day is just one example where every generation seems to forget the trials and maybe the sacrifices of the previous generations, regardless of what nationality or whatever. That's just kind of a thing. In fact, even Solomon acknowledged that this is the way of things, that each generation will forget what has happened before. And it's important, though, that for Christians that we not fall into that trap, that we teach our children so that they don't make the same mistakes that the generations in the past have made, that we learn from those in the past. This is one of the reasons why Paul brings up Israel in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. We have these things written to us for an example, so that we don't make the same mistakes that Israel made when they tempted the Lord in the wilderness and so forth. And that we learn from not only the mistakes of the past that people made, but also from the people of faith and what they did properly, what they did well and right. And there's a reason why there's always a remnant. And it's because there's always those who successfully teach their children, prepare their children to one day be individuals who trust in Jehovah. And even when the rest of the generation of Israel didn't do that, there's always a remnant of those who did. And I think that's very important for us to remember, very important reminder for us. We can see it happening in real time in our current generation, how that the generation coming forgets things that's happened in the past, maybe doesn't take it as seriously or think it's as important as it should be. And I think that's very important that we not only teach our children about Jehovah, but that we teach our children about why we do the things that we do. Why do we sing? Why do we not use instruments? Why do we not do this, but we do this, and so forth? To teach them about the authority of the Lord, to impress upon them what God has commanded, so that when they do face trials, which they will, when they face challenges to their faith, they're equipped to be able to deal with them. And even when we do everything right, sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes our world is hard enough. And sometimes even then our children may not make all the best choices that they should. But we need to be able to equip them to be able to do the best they can to remember Jehovah, to remember who Jehovah is, what he has done in the past. There's a reason why over and over and over again the children of Israel are reminded of the Exodus. They're reminded of the Red Sea being parted. They're reminded of the countless times God took care of them in the wilderness. Over and over in the Psalms, over and over. This is the Lord, this is Jehovah who did this and who did this. There's a reason why all that is to be remembered. Because Jehovah hasn't changed. The same Jehovah today, he hasn't changed from being the same Jehovah he was when he parted the Red Sea and when he has pity on his people. Still the same Jehovah. Granted, we're under the new law of Christ, but it's still the same Jehovah. And we have to be prepared to not only remember that, but to make sure our children remember that as well. That's the daily devotional for you today. Tomorrow's Wednesday, so we won't have a daily devotional tomorrow. So our next daily devotional will be on Thursday at 6:30. Lord willing, I'll see you all then. Thanks, everybody.